Displaced. George. Prologue. George crept into the convention hall, ducking and swaying past the other human organisms. They were all dressed in brightly colored, bizarre costumes, holding plastic weaponry. The worst part was, the room was like nothing he had ever seen. The light and noise of the convention hall was excruciating, a sheer pandemonium of excited moving entities. He squinted at them through the mesh of his costume. George himself was dressed as a character called Bowser, an anthropomorphic testodyne or turtle. According to some of his notes in Human Studies, a personal obsession of his covering everything from pop culture to memetic info-hazardry, this was a semi-popular enough character that it would not draw attention to him. The heat of his costume coated him in sweat, and the sapient swarm bumped into him on a regular basis, making him shudder at every touch. He pulled out a camera, pen, and notepad, and began recording the passing convention-goers. Age 24, endomorphic male, dressed in multi-hued equine costume and sporting a burrito. Invalid target, do not engage. Age 19, ectomorphic male, dressed as indiscernible fantasy game character. Has smug grin, invalid target, do not engage. Age 20, severely endomorphic male, dressed as popular sci-fi character referred to as Princess Leia. Star Wars is stupid, invalid target, do not engage. George closed his eyes. This was the George's third venture in the last year into the common human substrate, at the prompt of his own human relatives and online friends. He grimaced, clenching his teeth like the Grinch on steroids.
Get out of the dark room,
they said.
Speak to another living being,
they said.
Are you in the walls? Where are you hiding?
They said. In the end, he had agreed to join his siblings and friends on the venture into a comic convention, but strictly for research purposes. He peered down at his notes. He had arrived in the correct room in the local garb and was to make vocal contact with the closest anthropoid. He shambled over to the closest target and coughed horrendously, clearing the spiders out of his vocal cords. George is a perfectly human entity, to be clear, and not genetically related to the Fulcidae species of arachnid. Hello, how are you, how is your day? Page 23, turn page over. He stared at the ground, his voice rasping like a badger in a fight with a cheese grater. George looked up. The foreign entity appeared not to hear him. This one's probably broken. He coughed again, preparing his throat, and stepped closer. Faulty human entity, engage in social pleasantries, he said, pointing his web-covered camera in the victim's face, and clicking his pen open. The target stared at the George in bewilderment, and tried to step away as the man in the Bowser costume pulled off a clawed glove revealing a hand like a spider's accident, which reached out and swiped at the man with a Sharpie marker, leaving him with a red X across his chest. George put the cap back on the Sharpie, muttering to himself as he checked off a box on the clipboard. Something gripped his arm tightly. The previous target was holding him, making angry noises and gesturing at the red marking George had left on his costume. The target's lips moved, his eyebrows turned down at the inner edges. George coiled down, slipping out of their grasp like a greased donkey, and made a noise. He scuttled backwards, retreating to the safety of his familial relations. Two brother units, dressed respectively as a gangster and a knight, as well as his two friend units, dressed as an alien and a filthy merchant. They had spoken online for months now, discussing their favorite conspiracy theories and horror fiction, a particular favorite of George's. That's because it's super good. He felt a hand on his shoulder. Friend Stephanie addressed him.
Hey, have you bought any of the cool loot yet? There's a creepypasta booth over there. You should go check it out.
I am the void who sleeps in the... George coughed. He looked at the person. Yeah, I've just been chatting with people so far. I'm going to go to that Slender Man panel later. You want to come with, Stephanie? He said, showing teeth. Stephanie's face screwed up.
Dude, you know my name's Steph, not Stephanie. Get it right. Please, I ain't a chick.
George pulled a crumpled piece of paper from a somewhere and looked at the person. According to your birth certificate, your full name is Stephanie Smithson. Is this not the proper record? Steph snatched the paper from his hand.
That! My parents named me before I was born. Hospital scans ain't always perfect. They thought I was a girl.
George lurched towards Steph like a child's restaurant animatronic. Stephanie, 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 Stephanie!
Shut up!
The alien Belle spoke.
Did you guys play the new StarCraft 2 expansion?
Sci-fi is dumb and you cheat at that game, George said, looking angrily at the ground.
I don't cheat, you just don't know how to play.
I don't play video games, I'm just here for the books,
said Joel, the gangster. John ate a burrito. Steph turned.
Is that what your costume is from?
Said John, grunting through his helmet.
I will not. Where did you even get that?
Hey, have you guys seen these?
Said Joel, picking up something dirty. Holding it forward, he uncrumpled the mass, revealing a pamphlet.
Creepypasta booth. Room 13, floor 1. We have a fright to give you a fright. We sell blood, knives, skulls, creepypasta books.
George recoiled, turtling into his turtle costume. That is a mockery of my interests. Stephanie snorted.
George, go check it out.
I came here for research purposes, to study the contemporary culture of human... Stephanie moved closer.
Come on, it will be fun to see the spectacle of it. Besides, it says they sell costume horns, and your Bowser costume has toilet rolls for horns.
George looked at the person and pivoted away, arms curling and tensing like a tree branch in a horror movie. I will fulfill the request to further the human studies. George passed through the frothing, sweaty mob and reached a curtained-off door with the words Creepypasta merch taped on. The curtains billowed out of his way as he reached out his hand, the door creaking open. A long hallway stretched before him, and a booth lay at the end of the long hallway. George shuffled closer. Lights flickering on and off above the booth, and quite spooky music emanated from a chipped black gramophone. George breathed in relief, glad to be free of the incessant chatter and movement of the crowd. Silence poured in, and his mind calmed. Prints of horrific creatures adorned the three walls, along with masks of every kind of monster. Tacky, malformed plushies of popular monsters coated the wall on the left. The tables were filled to the brim with tomes of amateur attempts at horror. The shopkeeper floated in the edges of his vision, stark white face looming over him like a skull. George looked at the person and pulled up his notes, looking through the script section for store. He looked up, realizing that the merchant had been speaking to him. I'm here, George announced. He looked at the human merchant's face, which contorted with annoyance. That was strange. George glanced at his notes and looked back at the person.
What would you like to buy, young fella?
George shuddered at the man's voice. It reminded him of his own, but it felt wrong in George's mind, like murky water. The man's ever-present grin faltered at the specter of George. Hello? Insert name here. I would like to buy insert item or items here.
You know, that's quite a nice Bowser costume you have there. I couldn't help but notice, however, it's missing the horns. We happen to have many replica horns here. How would you like to complete your costume?
George made a face and took off his head. The Bowser head was now indeed missing the horns, which appeared to have snapped off. George looked at the man's now closed fists. Give me the best you have, George said. He looked through his notes further. The face was not making annoyance, it was cunning. George looked up and down at the man. He was a tall, filthy man in a black trench coat. Dreadlocks hung down from his head, dangling down to his knees. Face covered in black and white paint with a design of a skull, and his eyes sunk into his face like a leviathan in the ocean.
The best I have, eh?
The man said. He pulled out a wooden box, which creaked open slowly to reveal painted wooden horns. No, those look cursed. Also, do you have any knives? The merchant grinned. The gramophone stuttered and skipped, repeating the same jarring tune.
Judging from your costume, I assume you enjoy video games. I have just the thing for a kid like you.
The man pulled up another box, which contained a Nintendo 64 cartridge. The label was all black, and scratch marks covered the corner. No, that looks cursed. I need horns now. The man's face fell.
Look behind you,
the person said. George looked around and saw nothing but the long, empty hallway, lights flickering on and off ominously. He felt sudden slight pressure on the sides of his head and reached up, grasping at the wooden horns.
You have been granted what you desire, free of charge.
The man's grin grew. The lights flickered more, and George slumped down, chills running through his body, coursing through his temples like ice. The man slipped into the shadows, laughing like a politician as the room was enveloped in darkness. George felt his body change, melting into cold fear. He fell to the ground, clutching tightly at his new horns and rocking back and forth as the shadows enveloped him.